Good afternoon and welcome to all. My name is Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., and I am chair of TCU's Race and Reconciliation Initiative. Before we go any further, allow for me to state that we respectfully acknowledge all Native American peoples who have lived on this land since time immemorial. TCU especially acknowledges and pays respect to the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose historical homelands our university is located. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., aka Dr. G, and we are sponsoring this exciting program today about sharing in the struggle. Before we meet our panelists and understand their perspectives on this topic that is quite salient to our campus as we proceed down the path towards reconciliation, allow me to just remind all of us who are tuning in that our TCU Race and Reconciliation Initiative, or RRI for short, is built to fulfill the Chancellor and Board of Trustees' charge of studying TCU's relationship with slavery, racism, and the Confederacy. We are an academically based, historically focused initiative designed to investigate and document TCU's history, and thus, as a courtesy, any questions outside of our scope will be redirected to the appropriate parties. We are currently in year 2 of a 5-year plan, and for anyone who is interested about learning more about what TCU is doing with respect to reconciliation, feel free to visit our website, and there you can learn more about the initiative in general and also about RRI Week in particular. This event kicks off our full slate and week of activities, and we believe there's something for everyone. Of particular note, you should be sure to look out for the 23rd of February, Wednesday of this week. We will be hosting as a virtual keynote, Reverend Wheeler Parker. He is the last surviving cousin of Emmett Till, and he witnessed the kidnapping that fateful night in 1955 and has since led a life of reconciliation that is quite powerful for us to learn from. Any and everyone is free to join, as it will be on Facebook Live at 6 o'clock this Wednesday. But indeed, we wanted to give you a preview as to what's ahead, but not overlook what's right in front of us at this moment. And so while we are fortunate that you can join us for our discussion today, we hope that the perspectives offered will allow you to deepen your perspective and deepen your understanding of what we hopefully will bring us forward and push us toward our ultimate goal of reconciliation. And without any further ado, I would like to call forward to our virtual stage our graduate research assistant. Well, actually, he's not just any graduate research assistant. He's our graduate research assistant, Wonderkind. You all know him, ladies and gentlemen. He is the mellifluous. Yes, I still have to practice saying that word. Bear with me, y'all. He is the magnificent and the marvelous, and that would be Mr. Marcellus Perkins.
Dr. G, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. For those that are in the audience, thank you for spending your lunchtime hour with us. We do recognize you could be anywhere in the world, anywhere on Zoom, but you've decided to be with us during this important conversation. For that, we thank you. At this moment, I would like to introduce our wonderful guests and panelists. Panelists, as I call your name, please turn your cameras on. Our first panelist, who unfortunately was not able to attend due to unforeseen circumstances, Ms. Jessica Fuentes, the newly named editor of the Glass Tire magazine and also very involved in community outreach through the arts in the DFW area. She is also on the board of Arts de la Rosa. She is helping start Kinfolk House, a project started by Cedric and Latia Huckabee, which is deeply rooted in creating strong community ties. Dr. Stella Smith serves as assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling and the associate director for the Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability Center at the Prairie View A&M University. Prior to this role, she held several roles in the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Smith, hello. Mr. Rickie Clark, educational consultant, author extraordinaire, and the executive director of the Fort Worth Independent School District's My Brother's Keeper program initiative that was formed by former President Barack Obama in 2014. Mr. Clark. Dr. Jacinto Ramos serves as the chief of Board of Governance and Leadership at the Leadership ISD. He is a proven national, state, and community leader on educational policy, racial ethnic equity, and school board governance. Panelists, thank you all for joining us today. So I will start off with the first question. That's going to be our starter. What does the word reconciliation mean to you? How does reconciliation inform your professional work? And that's open to any of our panelists we have today. Whoever wants to jump first.
I'll go ahead and jump.
All right, Dr. Smith, thank you for starting the party off.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not going to be the last word on this because I see my co-panelists have thoughts as well. When I think about reconciliation, I think about actually having a true understanding, an understanding of where people are in the world, where they come into the space, an understanding of what the journey has been for different peoples, and a clear understanding of our differences and our similarities. So I think it's, when you think about reconciliation, it's really about acknowledging and understanding and seeing each other. I think in this world, we have a problem with actually seeing the folks that are right in front of us. Now we see each other through Zoom windows. Yeah. And so really being able to connect with someone, you have to have that kind of emotional connection and understanding of the roles and the history of the peoples in which that person came from in order to really have a true reconciliation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And add to that, if I would, I mean, it's the opportunity for two or more people or two groups of people to work through issues that we may or may not have. I think when I think about reconciliation, I always say that different don't mean deficit. It's just that we don't know the differences. And once we know what the difference in the likes, then we break down a lot of those barriers. So reconciliation for me is the opportunity for two people to reconcile, or groups of people to reconcile differences. And I'll stop with that.
All right.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add to that is that, you know, I'm Roman Catholic. So anytime I hear that word, I think of going to confession. With that said, I mean, I look at the term in the work that we're doing in terms of, is there awareness around what's been going on? You know, that conflict that Rickie's talking about. Is there awareness? Is there acknowledgement? And is there action associated with that? So when I think of that, I think of the whole process from becoming aware and then acknowledging that we actually have the challenges that we do. And then what are we going to do about it?
Absolutely. Now, I guess that's a great start to these set of questions. So I guess my follow-up for you all, what efforts are taking place at your specific jobs with respects to diversity, equity, inclusion that you can share that others may learn from?
So I'll go ahead and start it off.
All right, start the party off.
Started off. So as you mentioned, I work at Prairie View A&M University. And so in my role as a faculty member and as a center director, we do a lot of programming around understanding the perspectives of underrepresented students in the P through 20 pipeline. So from pre-kindergarten all the way through graduate school, but from an asset-based perspective. So I think for education, in terms of trying to promote reconciliation, we have to promote the assets that our students bring to the room. And by doing that, by helping the next generation of teachers, the next generation of principals, superintendents, understand our students from an asset-based perspective, we help to bring about conversations like this with people that are strong thinkers and thought leaders around these issues. An additional thing that's happening at Prairie View is the creation of our Ruth J. Simmons Race Center. And so they have 3 things that they are doing in that center. So one of them is a committee on the legacy of slavery and the impact of segregation at Prairie View, which is similar to these efforts at TCU, where we are looking as a historically Black college or university at what is our connection with slavery. Given that Prairie View was a plantation and we walk on the lands that our forefathers as Black people were tilling and were planting. And so to have that history in the space is very powerful. And so as people, we need to understand it. Somehow we have lost a connection with that history. And that's part of how, that's part of what you need to do within reconciliation. Sometimes you have to reconcile with yourself, and think about where your history is. And the last two things that they're working on is a voting rights lab and also implicit bias training. So helping us from an HBCU perspective, understand implicit bias and understand voting rights in a way in which we can go out there and really advocate for change in those areas.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. I talk a little bit about what we do here at Fort Worth. So if you mentioned earlier, we run the the executive director for the My Brother Keeper initiative. And in our initiative, we focus predominantly on African American and Latinos. We allow everyone to come in, but our focus is on Mexican Americans, Latinos, and African Americans. And we focus on culture. Culture of human beings like fish to water. We want to teach you massive doses of their history, but massive dose of African history as well as Latino history. It's not that we exclude anybody else's history, is that we don't get this in school. And so because we don't get it, in order for you to help anybody, they must start with themselves. So I think it's very important that you start with who they are, because I can't teach you anything till you first know who you are. So we teach them about who they are. Why are you proud to be African? Why are you proud to be Mexican? What's the color of the Mexican flag? What's the color of the African flag? What's the meaning of the flag? Well, and then what do we have that go and coincide with each other? So we start with that, teaching them about themselves. And I think that's very important, asking them questions like, what is the original name of Africa? The fact that there are pyramids in Mexico as well as pyramids in Africa. And don't get it twisted. I don't know as much as I should know about the Mexican history, but I'm hiring folks who do know. They can share that part. I said earlier, you can't lead where you don't go, and you certainly can't teach what you don't know. And so the first thing that you can do with anybody in reference to reconciliation is to teach them who they are, right? And let's go back. When did all this start? The first step is to go back. You go to a psychiatric hospital, the first question they're going to ask you, let's go back. When did this all start? They want to know about your mom and your daddy. And I say that too. I'm a mathematician, and I believe that you can't solve a trigonometry problem if you don't know trig. You can't even think trig if you don't know trig. Now you think you thinking, but you ain't really thinking. You're just acting to what's up there. So in order for us to work with folks of our own culture or any other culture, you must start with his story, her story, and my story.
Mr. Clark, I just want to ask a quick follow-up then. So why do you think it's so controversial when people want to teach about themselves, when they want to teach the history of particular people, particularly minoritized groups of people? Why is this such a issue? Pushback, yeah.
So first of all, I wouldn't even use the word minority. We don't even teach our kids that word minority. So none of our children are minority if we look at it globally.
I was saying minoritized.
I know why you said it. Yes,
minoritized. Okay. No.
But every chance I get, I always call it a teachable moment. So we don't use the word minority. Minority means less than, not equal to, or equal to who? Who set the standard? So people of color, one of the things I think that is important for them to teach them their history, there's a lot of pushback, is because this is an I statement. I think it's a lot of pushback is because they don't know. And they're afraid of what may come out. It's almost like what's in the house and you got to go in that attic and clean it out, or in that basement and pull out that mess, right? So when it's important for you to go pull out the mess, you don't want to be mindful of the fact that my grandmother, I don't have to say my great-grandmother, but my great-mother, my grandmother, or my mother, or my older siblings were involved in treating someone else inhumane. I didn't even talk about race, just teaching them inhumane. The fact that they don't want us to talk about Ruby Bridges and heck, she's 65 and I'm 60. Something's not adding up with that. And I believe that. And I think the other thing when I think about it is that one of the things that they were not allowed to do during slavery, right? You couldn't learn to read and write, right? So it stays right where it is. Ever did anything change? If I taught you who you were, then you become empowered. And so I believe that the main reason why they don't teach us about who we are and whose we are is because it empowers us. And once you empower it, it's hard to oppress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Professor Ramos, did you have anything you wanted to add before I jump to the next question?
Just real quick, Rickie's my mentor. So, this is the beautiful part of when I get to share a space with him, that what I'm going to say, I think, becomes more relevant in people seeing how and why I think the way I do and operate the way I do. And to your question about, what's going on and what we're doing. I mean, I've got multiple hats. So the first one with Leadership IZ, it's a nonprofit, and we help develop community leaders We help train and support school board members and superintendent teams in our public school systems in Texas. But then I'm also a school board trustee in Fort Worth ISD. And so on all of those fronts, I feel like they're all hitting on the same level, where the counter to the critical race theory is in every facet of my life, from what I do for a living to the job that I do for free 99 as a school board member. We young people tend to think we get paid a lot of money to be on the school board, but the work that had taken off so well since 2016. We're well versed in Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations About Race protocol, and we incorporated that not only in the school system, but also in our community, or we're really beginning to do it in our community. And one of the main things that we learned in there is a second condition. There's 6 of them. And the second one is that we learn how to isolate race. And as uncomfortable as that is, that's one of the agreements that's also in the protocol, that we're going to experience discomfort in people of all walks of life. So for me, what I'm living day in and day out is this counter to critical race theory. I watched the Saturday Night Live skits on people going to school board meetings and sounding off and have no clue what critical race theory is, making all these assumptions and making all these really false accusations about how it's so deeply ingrained in the K through 12 school system. Now, I'll get beat up for it again. I'm not opposed to allowing scholarly work and theoretical work to enter our school systems. I just think that this is that one area of scholarly work that really has, America shaken up. And I'll be even more specific, those that subscribe to a white supremacist mindset, this fear that I'm living in day in and day out of people that are educated, people that have this understanding of scholarly work. And now all of a sudden it's not okay. It makes me think of those T-shirts that I see young people wearing that says Black and Educated, America's Most Dangerous, person. The same one for Latinos. So yeah, man, I'm just seeing like a full blown pushback, and I'm going to be real to kind of get this conversation going as well. I'm not seeing people come in to take a stand against the anti CRT in these conversations. So that's got me a little concerned, but I'm pretty sure we'll touch on that in a bit.
Absolutely. Before we get to the meat of the conversation, just for more of the foundational text, and that's kind of why I started with some of these questions. For Dr. Smith, can you, for our listeners, define the difference between equity and equality? Because a lot of times I think some people conflate the two terms. So before we get into the actual conversation, if you can define that for us, that would be great.
Absolutely. And you're right. Many times when people do stand up for what is right for underrepresented populations, the mantra is, okay, well, we're going to give them the equal amount. We're going to give this school district $1 million. We're going to give this one $1 million. But what people don't see is that you have to be starting at the same place on the start line, in order to possibly, and this is still possibly, use those resources in the same way. And so often we talk about the difference between equity and equality. So an example very quickly. So Jonathan Kozol wrote a book, Savage Inequalities, I think is the name of it. Hopefully I got that right. And an example that he had in there was that, yes, these two school districts, one affluent, one more with lower SES, got the same amount of money. So the affluent school bought more horses for their equestrian team. They added more computers to their computer lab at that time. This is an old study, so it was in like the 80s, early 90s. They added all these different things to their school district in order to make it better. It was an accentuation of what they already had. The school that was more impoverished fixed the sewer lines because water was running through the kitchen, through the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. So when people say, oh, I'm going to give you money and I'm just going to make it equal, and you don't think about the situation in which those students are in or those people are in, when you give them those funds, you lose the impact of what hopefully you were trying to do. So equity and equality are not the same thing. And in our school systems and in our society, we have people that need equitable treatment, not equal treatment. We have people that are far behind on the start line. We've got people that have all sorts of boulders and barriers and are chained to the ground that are trying to run races. And so we really need to think about what is an equitable solution to supporting people from all walks of life as they are moving through and trying to achieve this dream that we've all bought into, that is an American dream.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And the reason why I wanted to pose that question is because, you know, sometimes we misinterpret or have a misunderstanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And sometimes that E word we kind of conflate or not be able to define and apply appropriately. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question. Because a lot of times these are the conversations that make us very uncomfortable. And sometimes that's where knowledge is sparked the most in the discomfort. So transitioning over to more sort of the meat of the conversation, and speaking of discomfort, what about the tensions between Black and Brown communities? How would you all assess that through the lens and the work that you all do in the communities?
Let me start off with that, if that's okay.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
I don't like it when we weaponize people of color against each other. That'd be my first comment, right?
Mhm.
To weaponize people of color against each other. The first thing is that I think that just like what we're doing in MBK, I don't know the history like they don't know my history.
Mhm.
I don't know all I need to know about the Mexicans or the Latinos. They don't know all they need to know about African Americans. We ain't got to be caught in the who's worse than this or who been more guilty, because we all dealing with it right now. The struggle is real for everybody. But we have to understand the fact that I can tell you how that light affected me from where I'm standing. You can tell me how that light affected when you from where you standing. My problems where I am, yours are where you are. Now I can give you a vantage point from where I'm standing and vice versa. But when I hear that, I think that's tension that people put in the air, because when I talk to my brothers, my Mexican brothers who reach out, that I reach out to, then that's just a farce. When I started talking to them, sharing with them information, I mean, we both going through things, right? And so whenever I see that comes up, I try to break it down. So if I have a Black brother telling me some, you know, Mexicans, no, they're just the Mexicans that you know, right? When I hear a sister say something about, well, when I was over there, I was like, no, that's not true. And I got to be open, perfectly honest. I had to learn that for myself. I went through camp community. He since always talk about me being his mentor, but I learned a lot from him just being there, because I'm from the south side of Chicago. There were no Mexicans or Latinos in my neighborhood. We are so segregated in Chicago, it's crazy. But when I moved to Texas, I began to meet them. And guess what's deep about it? After interacting with Cinto and going to camp community, when I go home now, I see Mexicans everywhere. It's like there was a filter that I didn't see them. They were like the invisible man. But now that I know, it's deep. I want to share something with you. Cinto invited me to speak at UNT once. He couldn't make it. So he invited me, right? So I'm his mentor, but he invited me. So I went and spoke for him over at UTA, and it was Lambda. I didn't even know there was an organization called Lambda, Mexicans own fraternity. And they were all Mexicans, and most of them, 90% of them had degrees. And I'm in there speaking, right? And I'm talking, and I was just so impressed with what I saw that my whole conversation changed, because I'm saying, hey, this is an example of greatness, but I had never seen it. I've never seen that before. So I was able to come back and say, I've seen 500 Mexicans with degrees, right? So you can't never tell me that story about the negative things about them, because I went and found out for myself. And so if there's anybody that have issues between Black and Brown, go find out for yourself, right? And if you really do want to reconcile, start with the one you know. And I'll stop with that.
Mr. Clark, well, just for a quick follow-up, you know, how would, you know, at like a college campus such as TCU, where you have Black and Brown students, and instead of, you know, viewing us as like we're weaponizing, but more so, how do we just talk to the realities of the situation where there is not a connective community between the two groups? What would you say to that?
One of the things I do, and I shared that with you all earlier, is that the first thing I began to do when I met, and Cinto probably can attest to this, first time when I meet, especially young folks, right? I start off with this. Can you name 5 Mexican men who've done something great, right? They can't play, they can't sell drugs, they can't play sports, they can't be entertainers. I asked that same question to the African Americans, right? Name 5 of them, and then they look and see the dichotomy that neither one of them can do it. He can't name 5 Mexicans, they can't, and they both are the same. And then they start realizing, so first you got to do is find a commonality, right? What do we have in common? And so what I would say with that is, on your campus, you have a MBK program that was started by Jacinto's son, Danny, on your campus right now. And when we meet in there, I start teaching about my history from my vantage point, and guess what they do? They share with me their history. And once we find out what we know about each other, that reconciliation you're talking about, it breaks down those walls, right? Now the barrier changes. So I don't have a problem with having silos for Mexican Americans, or silos for Latin Americans, or silos for Africans, and silos for African Americans. But at some point we come together and I share with you and you share with me. And once we share those commonalities, it breaks down. And I know what it's like at TCU. I've been there. But as I go into those classrooms, and most of the classrooms that I go into is predominantly, it's a PWI, predominantly white. So I may see a few Mexican Americans, might see a few Africans, but when you start sharing information and they see the commonality, they come together. At the end of my presentation, they come to me asking me questions about my culture, when in turn, I can ask them about theirs, and whatever I don't know, I will ask Cinto, or go and start studying for yourself.
Absolutely. To my other
You're going to go talk to somebody you don't know nothing about them.
Right. to my other panelists, what might you all say to the lateral friction between Black and brown communities?
Yeah, I think this is one where I really appreciate the conversation, because I have Rickie, Quentin Phillips, I have my friend Sean Lassiter, I've got a lot of friends in the Black community, and I've got a lot of people who I believe have invested in me a great deal, to the point that it was where my own brown community wasn't able to be there. I could actually find more Black scholars than I could brown scholars during my most formative years, and including when I got to the university. And the only brown professor teacher that I ever remember is Dr. Jose Angel Gutierrez, who happens to be one of the 3 founders of La Raza Unida political party. Radical, wrote a book called The Making of a Chicano Militant. And really, between him and Rickie coming into my life, sent me on this journey of consciousness. And I caught myself learning more about African history, not even African American, African history, right? Rickie's taught me all the taglines. Slavery is not Black history. Slavery is an interruption of Black history. So when he said things like that to me, it jolted me, and it got me thinking, what am I missing and who am I? And also the conversations with Rickie, that I have a privilege, that my native country, my native land is actually here. And there's a line between Texas and Mexico, and I have family on that other side of the line. And taking a deep dive into that, meeting people from the Crest Department, like Dr. Krochmal and others in that arena, that began to feed me and give me information. So I think that that's what's lacking for the counter of what we call competing victimization. When people of color begin to fight with one another, and for what we say in the streets, right, we're fighting for the scraps on the table. And that's one of the things that, if I had not been able to go through my own racial identity journey, my own level of consciousness, I could easily see and identify when I had anti-Black sentiments growing up. And I can notice it in my own community in a heartbeat. Rickie and I constantly battle with this one major thing in the political world of Fort Worth, Texas, that on my side and north side, oh man, the Black people getting everything. And then I was over on the east side with Rickie when I first got elected, and I was getting my tail handed to me. And I'm in a room filled with Black men, and they're like, well, y'all Mexicans, y'all getting everything, and blah, 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 y'all getting, and I'm like, man, I just got elected, yo, like we're fighting already. And then here comes Rickie jumping in, like, yo, hey, y'all not going to come at Jacinto like that, because this guy, right, he co-signed for me, but he also did something a lot more powerful that we talk about. I don't need any more allies. I don't need you standing by my side. I need co-conspirators. I need you to analyze the power dynamics with me, and let's counter it. Let's get in front of it, and let's get better. So train me on how to address the anti-Black sentiment, but I can also help Rickie with, like, hey, Rick, in the Black community, there's some anti-brown sentiment. And because we're in a Black and white binary, it's usually a Black and white conversation. And that's one of the biggest triggers I see for the brown community. And I'll just even speak for what's true for me at TCU. I get flooded with young brown students every semester that feel so disconnected to the university, feel that there's, and that's that competing victimization mindset that's creeping in. So I'm saying, instead of looking at what you don't have, and Dr. Smith, I love what you said, right? That asset-based perspective, that's exactly what we have to really teach that to our young people. And I believe that just because that's what was taught for me, was to not look at what I don't have. And Rickie already said it, right? Differences don't mean deficits. That's easier said than done. But we're talking about power and resources, and this feeling that there's only so much to go around. And unfortunately, that's what continues to feed that narrative.
Absolutely. So you said a couple interesting things, and I wanted to follow up upon. So sometimes when we're in these conversations, we're using phrases that some of the audience may not be too privy to. So when you say anti-Black sentiment, or you say anti-Latinx sentiments, from that perspective, can you just add a little bit more context into what that means? And then, how can such prejudice deter us from keeping our eyes on the prize when we have that lens of being anti-Black from a Latinx perspective, or being anti-Latinx from a Black perspective? How can those things be to our own detriment?
Yeah, that's a really good catch, my friend, and a really worthwhile long conversation. But I'll try to boil it down as simple as I can.
Yeah.
These are the effects of colonialism. These are the effects of white America, European values, placing skin color, right? This whole notion of Caucasian and Negroid. And that's why we get this binary. You got Johann Blumenbach and Christoph Meiners using skulls and saying that, the size of the skull, the size of the brain actually determines capacity and intellectual ability for a human being, which we know is BS, right?
But phenomenology, right? It's phenomenology.
Yeah.
Phenomenology.
So how we end up with this idea that white is better and pure, and I love when Malcolm X spoke about it, right? When he described, and Rickie, how many negative words for Black in the dictionary?
There's 190 some words for negative that's Black, and 98 words for the word that's white that's positive. You think there's something wrong with being Black, like blackball, blacklisted, the list goes on. But when you're thinking about white, white angel food cake, white is right, and the list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So along that notion, right, in my community, in the brown community, this whole idea of another level of colorism, the darker you are, and it's a well-known conversation in the brown community of, I hope that my child doesn't come out, and they say it in Spanish, ojalá que no salga morenito. I hope that my baby doesn't come out dark-skinned, because the values of colonialism push for the lighter skin version of a person and that's what we see in our advertising, in our media. And those are the conversations we have in our classrooms at TCU, of bringing that and elevating that conversation to the forefront. So in the brown community, if Black is not seen as good and positive, it's seen as something bad. And in the anti-brown, I don't know that I can speak to it other than what I experienced and on the receiving end of this notion that there's so many of us and we're a booming population. And so what does that equate to again, right? That equates to power. But there's these gaps. And what Dr. Smith, what you were talking about with the voting, right? The work that we have to do on getting people out to vote. I think that part of that conversation is the brown community is not voting at the same level as the Black community. And there's probably connections there, right? Of like what the Black community has gone through at such extreme levels that the brown community hasn't always necessarily gone through, but there's a big disconnect. And in the brown community, for sure, because of the skin, the lighter the skin I have, the more opportunities I may have to turn my back and to be in a conformity stage to say, well, I'm not like one of them, and so maybe because I'm not experiencing it like a darker skinned brown person, I actually think that I can assimilate. I actually want to check that box of white Hispanic, right, versus challenging it and saying, wait, this doesn't fit me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of people think about what they might lose, so which exactly fits in with what you were saying. So it's really about a kind of this power dynamic and a fighting between these two races. But what we have to understand, and what people forget, is that, like you said, we're fighting over scraps. Fighting each other does not yield what we're trying to get to. And I think what we need to model in the classroom, and you mentioned that in your prior comments, is really forcing people to have true conversations about this. So what does it mean when you have the paper bag test? What does it mean when you are so against another race that when they're speaking in a different language, that just turns you to another place, takes you to another place? What does it mean when you bring other races into a historically Black college or university? One of the conversations we're continuing to have is, the university is open, it has a history, but how do we continue to have it grow and be inclusive and include those different fraternities, those different sororities, those different spaces, so that the institution can be something that supports reconciliation? And I think as academic institutions, we also need to understand how complicit we are in creating these silos. Like higher education was created for a reason. It is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. And when we are on those campuses trying to promote anti-racism and reconciliation, we are going against what these institutions were created to do. Mm-hmm. So often I tell my students, like, we have to acknowledge as academics our part in this, and then break the silo around allowing our students to continue to play the same part.
Dr. Smith, I wanted to kind of piggyback and return the question back to you when we're talking about what higher education is designed to do, what education is designed to do in general. Being that we're in the state of Texas and we've had this growing conversation of critical race theory, how do you think that has impacted your work and also impacted this conversation that we're having today between Black and Brown communities?
Well, one, I think most people don't know what critical race theory is.
Absolutely.
Like, and those of you that are thinking they know what it is, they are picking up on the power dynamic part of critical race theory. So critical race theory, the words themselves are such buzzwords and such words that can incite, that people are not even understanding the kind of the underlying tenets of what critical race theory is. And so what people that are fighting for critical race theory are fighting against it, they're fighting against power. They're fighting against the power of, Rickie said, they're fighting against people's realizing their history and empowering themselves to vote, empowering themselves to be full people and full citizens in this country. That is what they are fighting against. And they like to use these buzzwords of critical race theory. At its root, we wouldn't teach critical race theory to an elementary school student. But what we would do is teach them their history. So when they got to a point where they could understand those concepts, they would be ready for that. So that is what they're trying to stop us from doing when they take certain books away. When they decide that we are now, basically they're saying we're not a whole person because you took my whole history away. You don't see most of me in this space. And so as a higher education institution, I'm so lucky to be in an institution with Dr. Simmons, who is focusing and forcing us, even though we're a public institution, to continue to think about race and to continue to have that at the forefront, and to be proud of the legacy of Prairie View A&M University and what we can be as we move forward. And so the students that we teach, and I teach doctoral students, each one of them, I hope, my goal is to instill in them that same passion and desire. So when they go into school districts and do what they need to do, when they go to other institutions, whatever their heart's desire is for their degree, that they walk in power. They walk in knowledge about who they are and what we do. Nikki Giovanni, I just listened to her speak, and she said, Black people were an undegreed people, not an uneducated people. Yeah. So you got to think about both of those things, and we can all think of examples of that, right? The person who could have like a piece of tape and some gum and something else, and they could create this huge thing, this huge contraption, or someone who could create this masterpiece in the kitchen. We didn't have degrees; they kept us from that, but we were not uneducated, and we need to take that into the future. And we need to make sure our kids understand that.
Well, one thing I really do appreciate, all three of the panelists, you all are continually harping over this idea of educating or knowing your own history. And when you have understanding of your own history, you can walk into spaces knowing who you are. That allows you to introduce yourself, but also who's next to you. When you know yourself, you can know who's next to you. So I definitely appreciate all three of you all and that kind of centralized theme. Given we're getting close to time, I kind of wanted to ask you all, how would you all define communal allyship, or in what ways can allyship be implemented within the two communities?
I'm ready. I saw that one, communal allyship. So first of all, you have to be communal, right? To start off, to be an ally, right? So let's break it down. I got to know enough about you. I got to be in commune with you to even become an ally with you. So that's why I love camp community that we go to, right? It's a camp where you go, we work Black, white, Asian, Arab, Mexican, doesn't make a difference. First of all, I have to be common a goal, communal allies. I can't be your ally if you don't know me and I don't know you, right? It's hard to be an ally for someone that you don't know anything about. So I think the way you make a communal ally is that I'm going to share my information about myself, and you can share your information about you, right? And then what we find common, we work together with, because there's some things that we might not be able to do. But Communal allies, meaning that I'm in agreement with you, and guess what? You in agreement with you. And how do we come in this agreement with each other is by starting off with a dialogue, not a discussion, but a dialogue where I listen to you and you listen to me. Not a discussion where I'm going to change your views or you change mine. If you may hear me often say, this is an I statement, meaning I'm coming from my frame of reference, right? And you would give your statement. So one of the ways you make it communal is to set those parameters in place and to understand that we become, and now that we become a community within the community that transforms the community. Because if we come in there with one direction, then it's a Black thing. We come in there with another direction, it's a brown thing. But we come in there as allies, it's our thing. So we become the community within the community that transforms the community based on what we do, not what we say.
Yeah, I guess what I just want to add there from Rickie's perspective is he's also taught me. Normally, I would have said I'm going to piggyback, but he says if you don't eat pork or meat, I'm going to veg you back. So if I may, Rickie, may I veg you back off of you? All right, good deal. What he said there is so powerful, and that's what Rickie and I have been able to live in our experiences of not only the classrooms, but also with young people in the community and in leadership roles, that we work with young people to establish a common language first and set parameters. And that's why I love the Courageous Conversations about Race Protocol, because it's a tool that we use with the framework to be able to set those parameters and establish a common language. And it's not hiding from the tough topics. It's actually leaning into them, and leaning into them when you have established a common language and parameters goes a heck of a long way. The other part to that is identifying triggers in that dialogue, that I can build a relationship with you and say, hey, Rickie, you keep using that term Hispanic, you kind of triggered me right now. And real talk, the reason you don't hear me saying Latinx, there's enough people in my community that don't like that term at all. There are people like the old National Council of La Raza, which is now called something else. They straight up came out publicly and said, we don't endorse the term Latinx. So we don't know that unless we have this conversation, right? And so, like, you asked me, how do I identify? I would say, I would walk you through the stages. I'd say identify as Chicano, and then work my way to, well, my true identity is that I'm of the indigenous people of the Purupechas, which happen to be in the mountains of Michoacan, which is now Mexico. Because Rickie taught me I needed to go find my history from a point of liberation. And what happens when we have dialogue like this, we set parameters and we have a common language. When somebody like Rickie and Dr. Jose Angel sends me on this cookie trail to go find out who I am and where I came from, again, I have the privilege that I can do that. You know what I'm saying? So like my family still live in, we know exactly where we immigrated from. We know exactly how far we can go back, at least 100 years. That is liberating and that's empowering, but that happened by way of a dialogue, identifying triggers, learning from each other. And then the final one, which is so important, and it's one that sometimes people shy away from, but it's always acknowledging the power dynamics. Because if I acknowledge the power dynamics, if it's a brown issue, so I guess let me put it this way. What I've noticed is conflicts between Black and brown. When the Black community is up in arms saying, hey, another one of our people in our community has been shot and killed, and the brown community doesn't come out alongside to push back, that's hurtful to people in my circle that happen to be really passionate about that topic and saying, hey, how can you not be upset that we've had this many Black people shot and killed on camera and everything? But also some parts of the brown community will get upset and say, hey, Black community, why aren't you with me on these immigration issues? We got this Senate Bill 4 law in Texas that still allows law enforcement to pull me over and profile me and ask me if I'm born here. And if I'm not, they can take me in until I prove that I was here. And those are cycles that we know have been in the country, but those are cycles where we're missing each other and missing opportunities to lean in and engage and say, hey, your struggle is my struggle. Your fight is my fight. And once we get to that kind of a conversation, man, that's game changing.
So I just want to ask you, what are some examples, some productive examples of partnerships between Black and brown communities that people locally here in the city of Fort Worth should be privy to, as well as Dr. Smith in the Houston area, or just examples you've seen through you all's work?
Let me go. So we have the MBK. So we encourage you to be a part of that. But you keep hearing me mention camp community.
Yeah.
And so we were part of this camp, and that includes everybody, but predominantly African-American Latinos. And then I'm a part of a community frontline, right? which is an organization that works with them. And then what I also would say that if there aren't any of them and you really do want to do it, you start it. You start a dialogue with your own friend, that one person that you know of Mexican or Latino descent. Start with one. And so I think that that's possible, and we need to do more things like we're doing right now. I think that the reason why that big separation, Cinto said it, once you know the trigger words, you start from there, and then you start sharing with each other. Because once they learn about me from a liberating stage, then they won't think about slavery.
Absolutely.
Right? But if you or an African or any other race of people, and all you know about me is slavery, then it's kind of hard for you to be like, whoa, right? But when I began to share with them that my history began years ago in liberating thoughts, they look at us different. The partnership is broad, and we grow from there. So I think that, first of all, we have to start with what they have and build on what they know. And what I mean by that, what they haven't been informed of, we share with them.
Mr. Clark, is there, I know you mentioned My Brother's Keeper, but is there a sister program, My Sister's Keeper?
Yes, we started. Okay. Yeah, so we've started My Sister's Keeper. We're only in 5 schools right now for My Sister's Keeper. But if there's any campus that's interested, we are. And we'll be coming to TCU next month. And it's going to be we call it I forgot the term they use, but we'll be working predominantly with Latinos and Mexicans. We're taking Northside, Diamond Hill, and Carter Riverside and coming to meet with the Lambdas on your campus.
Okay. All right. Absolutely.
And then one organization that I'm part of is Children at Risk, which is it's kind of a policy organization that is focused in on more communal policy-driven work and also informational sessions and whatnot. So it's looking at a multitude of issues for around children.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. And Professor Ramos, I wanted to ask you, being that you're a school board member and that title, how hard is it sometimes to make some of the changes that you talked about today? We know that school board members, not all heroes wear capes, but some people have it harder than others. So from your perspective, how hard is it sometimes to make these changes?
Man, I feel like I got to stretch out for this one. All I'll say is, and I'll invite you to look at a Fort Worth ISD school board meeting from the last year and a half. You can go to YouTube and put Fort Worth ISD Ed TV school board. You'll see. You can even just Google school boards and CRT or whatever you want to use around it. I have a privilege that I get to work with school board members all over the state and all over the country, from Compton to Chicago to Miami to Houston. I'm in South Texas today. And the narrative around what's going on with this it's pretty intense in a number of districts. So what I'm going through, man, everything that I've read about, I can feel it now. And when I say that, I'm going to be vulnerable for a minute. I can feel it in my mental well-being. I can feel it in my physical well-being, the stress that comes with a whole movement. And really, I'm just going to call it what it is, from one political party, and not everybody in that political party, but there's initiatives being funded by the Republican Party to attack this and to attack local school systems. And look, if you're not familiar with it, let me just spit it out for you. Public school systems have been under attack. Our finances, our money is being taken away, our resources, right? So many different ways that our public school system has been attacked. And for me, there's a pattern of knowing, I studied school boards, I studied school systems, knowing how and why school systems came into being, who they were designed for originally. They weren't designed for us. So now when we're the majority, Black and brown and Asian students, right, that if we're the majority now, then I'm not surprised when the powers that be want to strip us of our resources, want to use whatever other kind of language they want to twist up how it's appropriate and okay to remove resources. But I'll put it this way. When schools are filled with white students, that's not what happens. That's not how this goes down. It just so happens that, like, and I'm gonna put another one out there that could probably be controversial. There happen to be more and more people of color starting to get on school boards to try to fix the system. I just don't know that that's really doable when we don't really have the power and the ability to influence all of it, from the monies and the resources and the curriculums. Thank goodness we have friends here at TCU who wrote a Latinx, Chicana history curriculum that we're now going to put in our school systems. We partner with Black universities to give us Africana history. so that we don't have to use the whitewashed version of history that eliminates and even just omits our people and our heritage. So just all I'm saying is watch one of those board meetings. You'll see we're under attack. We're losing superintendents left and right. In North Texas, I think we're up to 10 or 11 in just North Texas alone. It's happening all over the country. And unfortunately, what happens when you have turnover of superintendents like that, you have a dip in everything that school system is trying to take care of, because we don't have the leadership. And then on the boards, the same way. Board members are losing their seats because they won't stop talking about race and the implications of it.
Absolutely. Now, this was beyond impactful. Being that we're about to close it again, we can do this for a whole nother hour. I mean, this could be an easy part 2, part 3 series session, and just this conversation alone, especially in the Fort Worth community. But as we close out, first, I want to thank you all for your time, energy, and effort in being with us today. And now we'll ask you all to provide any closing comments that you would like to provide.
I want to start off, man. I think that it's only when you begin your history in a state of freedom that you come to properly understand your role, right? And so all Africans or Latinos beginning our history in 1619, they never solve our problems. When we're here talk about critical race at the CRT, to me, is culturally relevant teaching. And I always say that if you think our children are learning CRT in our school, then they some brilliant young people. And you won't be talking about their grade scores or their math scores. If they learning CRT, they brilliant, right? And then you talk about those are just buzzwords to keep us away. And so I think it's important for us to keep pushing the issue. It's sad that we talk about that. When you say CRT, you can't say, let's teach the African-American or Latino, Mexican-American in history in school, because you're talking CRT and you put all of them under the same thing. We actually literally banning books. Something's wrong with that. And what bothers me the most is that I don't understand why Europeans think that their children will side with the oppressor as opposed with siding with the abolitionists, right? You're so concerned with that. Why would you think your children side with that way and side with the other one? And I think that when Jacinto made that comment, I want to let you know, brother, I'm in there and I know you going through it. Not just you, but school boards throughout the country, right? This is 2022, and we still talking about what you gonna teach me in school? 2022. And the sad part is you got colleges and universities, and they don't even teach it, right? I asked the kids at TCU, and Jacinto can attest to that. When I taught them about our history from a liberating perspective, most of the kids in that classroom like, man, I'm here at the university. I ain't never heard that. As a matter of fact, they can't even tell you why it's a university, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, they can't leave where they don't go and don't teach what they don't know. Even in reconciliation, we know that race is a construct. It's humans. But how do you find a human? And I'll leave you with this. Quit asking the people about race. Quit asking about equity. Ask them about human rights. What we're dealing with right now is merely human rights. Rights that every human deserves, but there are 30 Declaration of International Human Rights. If we just dealt with that 30 human rights, you are not to have this conversation about anything else. And last, what did my man Baldwin say? If white folks don't want to treat places with us, then they know what we're going through, and they know what we're going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
So there's not much to add to that, other than what I would say is just really working hard to see each other. So within all of that Rickie was sharing, how do we make sure that we see each other on the street and that we connect? I think we have right now is a key time where we can reconnect with each other. And that's in reconciliation between Hispanic, Black communities, Asian communities who are also going through it right now, particularly with some of the COVID challenges and having violence against them. So, we as a people need to get reconnected with our own humanity and what our history is and our place and space here in order to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, I think my closing thoughts are going to be close to both of my colleagues on here. One, I'll jump on with what Rickie was mentioning. I love that young people have access to technology, because the young people I get to visit with, they're saying, man, let them take those dusty books, because I don't ever go to the library. I do everything online. And part of what's happening is I'm privy to seeing that young people are going and buying these on Amazon or on other platforms because they really haven't necessarily leaned on their libraries to give them that information. So I've also been privy to parents who have been fighting against this critical race theory, not really truly knowing what it is. And now I'm hearing that their children are asking them, why are you going and acting a fool at the school board meeting when I want to keep learning about that? And all my friends are of different backgrounds. And so you're trying to keep me from learning about them, and wait, you're trying to keep them from learning about themselves. So it's like parents are, I think it's, it's a phase. And I acknowledge that. I see the history. I've seen the patterns. I feel like almost this is a last stand, because now we're talking about people of color and our white brothers and sisters, high levels of consciousness that are acknowledging, that are becoming aware, they're acknowledging, and they're ready to do something about it. I'm just kind of waiting to see what that action is going to look like around the place. I know it's coming, and we'll hold the line and we'll do our part for those of us that are in these roles, because leadership isn't easy. And my superintendent, who's a good friend, Dr. Kent Scribner, he said conflict is the DNA of leadership. I didn't know that this is what I was signing up for free 99 8.5 years ago. But I know that having worked in the streets with young people in gangs, having been at the juvenile facility for 21 years, having done youth ministry, and having run a camp with Rickie Clark, had no idea that God was preparing me for the role of taking I'm trying not to curse, so taking all the hits. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, panelists. I appreciate it. Now I'd like to bring back to the stage our chair, Dr. G. And before I hand it over to Dr. G, I found it so fitting to say this. I heard Mr. Clark say this last year, and it's always stuck with me. This is for our leaders. We're all are leaders in the world. To lead the people, you must know the people. To know the people, you must love the people. To love the people, you must know yourself, and to know yourself is to love yourself. So Dr. G, I want to turn this back over to you to close us out for some closing remarks.
Absolutely. And we're so very thankful for the panelists and their time, and not only just thinking about the issue and for just being consistent with their efforts on a daily basis. That's what we wanted to highlight, this idea that good people are working to create good opportunities in our community to connect. We also just wanted to deal with what's in front of us. And so we thought of this topic in response to the fact that we are navigating similar tensions on our campus, as are many other campuses. And so rather than erase it, we want to simply embrace it and simply see what we can do to understand. And along those lines, as far as us coming together so we can learn about what it is that we're dealing with, I'd just like to make a few announcements with respect to there being, in addition to the Reconcile This podcast that you may have heard about with myself and Mr. Perkins, there's also a new podcast that you can also check wherever podcasts can be found, in Spotify, Apple, etc. It's called Let's Get Loud, started by two graduate students here in TCU. And so we definitely want to make sure you provide love and support as well there. TCU Press is also offering a little bit of love in the amount of 30% off of selected titles related to Black History Month. So be sure to provide some love and support there as well. And also we have an actual survey that we would like for many people to know about with respect to us understanding a little bit more about the relationship we have with the campus that we love. And so if you go to the TCU website, you will see the survey available to you is about the racial geography, just so we can understand just how we're oriented and situated with one another. Along those lines, the next slide, please. We have a couple of upcoming events that we wanted to let you know about, including tonight at 6 o'clock. Be sure to check out a conversation about purple, black, and white at the Kelly Center, navigating the pandemic, strategies for networking and mentoring. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, there will be a heat board ceremony to honor those in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and others who are working to institutionalize many of the ideas that we're talking about. Because again, going by Dr. Ramos' response to his positionality in the board is often difficult to do, but many hands make the load light. And this Friday, do be sure to note that there will be cultural cuisine. It's the last Friday of every month for those who haven't yet to catch the rhythm, but do be sure to stop by the Intercultural Center at some point after 11:30 to partake in that event. And lastly, on the 28th, the last day of the shortest month of the year, at 7 o'clock, we will be celebrating TCU First. Many of you know that Mr. Laurent Honeycutt and Madam President Leslie Ekbe are indeed making history, Black history as we speak, with both being the first, Laurent being the first Black president for student government body and Ms. Ekbe being the first graduate student president. And so with all those events, we also want you to finally know about this coming Wednesday that with the next slide, we have an event that we absolutely feel is an important opportunity for us to make this connection again with our history and not only learn more about the Emmett Till story, but to also learn from those who are walking the path of reconciliation. How do you balance dealing with the difficult days, the anger, the frustration that some of our panelists refer to, and how do you find the proper outlets to channel and be positive and productive and opening up a door and a dialogue for continued conversation. So that is one thing that hopefully you'll continue to join us with and consider as we make our way together. So in closing, as I've always said before, we cannot promise anything that will happen as a result of our efforts, but we do pledge to you that we are doing the best we can with what we have. Thank you again, and until next time.